What is a hero? A mythological figure, often of divine descent, endowed with great strength or ability? An illustrious warrior? No. It's a person admired for achievements and noble qualities, one who shows great courage. Welcome to the What's a Hero podcast, where we dive deep into what a hero is and what makes them that hero. I'm your host, Ken Frownfelter, and I'm going to be introducing you to some of the world's most likely and unlikely heroes. You may have never heard of them before, and they most likely have never met you. But they all have one thing in common. They are ready to do whatever it takes to help make you better, even if it means sacrificing everything for you. Let's get into it.
This is episode 35 of the What's a Hero podcast with me, Ken Frownfelter. Have you ever considered where life takes you? The choices we make through life? People we hang out with, the schools we choose to attend, the education we seek, the experiences we have. There's also the careers we choose, the people we call family, the significant others we choose to spend our life with. Then there's our children and those that entirely depend on us. They become our passion in life, and we'd love to see them grow and learn and become good people themselves. Now, I'm normally a fairly positive person, and I always look for the good in situations. And as a police officer, I know there's dark situations out there. Some people are downright evil. I don't know why. And I just do not understand why they are that way. And they're that way for different reasons, I guess. And all that stuff I just said, the family and the job and all that stuff like that, can be taken away in the blink of an eye because of evil and recklessness. It's painful to think about, but we have to think about it. There are people who have given everything up for others, children who have grown up without fathers and mothers because of evil and recklessness. The choices of some people have such a direct and lasting impact on others that it can change the trajectory of one's life in the most drastic way. Heroes who have left their loved ones to serve and protect other people because that's what they do. So today, we're going to be talking about those heroes and the lessons we can all take from their sacrifices. And so with me today is a gentleman who is number 3 in a 4-generation line of law enforcement officers. He's the sheriff of Dodge County, Minnesota, and the host of the Officer Down Memorial podcast. Welcome, Scott Rose. How you doing, sir?
Thank you, Ken. I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I'm absolutely honored to have you on here. And, when we got to talking and you said, yeah, let's take a look at that and see if we can get together for the show. And I thought, hey, that would be fantastic, because this topic is something that, it kind of gets touched on, but we don't know some of the detailed stories of these folks, and some of the stuff that we can talk about is just amazing and so, I guess, life altering, and we learned so many lessons from it that we don't even realize it.
Yeah, agreed. The all we get typically is that that paragraph or two in the state's memorial webpage or on the agency's memorial page talking about that officer and what happened with him. But there's so much more to these stories and about these heroes, and that's kind of what got me started. Right.
So I guess let's look at you really quick before we dig into that. Who is Scott Rose? Who was little Scott that ran around and decided to choose, I'm going to be a police officer when I grow up? Who is this little guy?
Oh my! So Scott was a cop's kid and a teacher's kid. My dad was a 7th and 8th grade English teacher. He was also a deputy for the Dodge County Sheriff's Office, the agency that I work for now. And I was the typical cop's kid, typical teacher's kid. I was always in trouble.
Yeah.
School was more of a social experiment for me. I really didn't pay a whole lot of attention to what I should have been paying attention to in school. And so I was always in trouble. I was, not major trouble, but I was a pain in the butt. My dad was still here, he'd tell you that.
You heard your name from the front of the room or
Oh
back
my
of the room
God.
multiple times.
Yes.
Yeah.
I was a regular. I was a regular in detention. I'd been in the back seat a few times in squads, and it was just the way it was. Back then, my dad was very old school, very conservative. He worked as a full-time teacher and a part-time cop during the school year, then a full-time cop in the summer. And he did everything he could so mom could stay home. So we always had one of them at home
Oh,
taking
right.
care of myself and my three brothers. So they were old school that way. And being a full-time teacher in the 70s and 80s, and then a part-time cop, obviously he didn't make much money.
Right.
And with him being the sole income provider, in order to keep mom home, he was always gone. He wasn't.
Mhm.
He wasn't there a lot, and it wasn't because he didn't want to be.
Mhm.
It was because he just did everything that he could to make ends meet and to take care of us.
Right.
And
Right.
so I kind of rebelled as a kid, and I was a troublemaker, and I graduated barely.
Yeah.
And yeah, he joked about that a lot. That I earned every gray hair in his head, and most of the ones that had fallen out.
Yeah.
And my mom will tell you the same. So
That's funny. So did you know that? I mean, I'm guessing before I asked that, did were you outside playing all the time? I'm guessing, right? You didn't stay inside, watch TV all the time?
no. Yeah, I wasn't a TV guy. I was a music guy. So I actually had some back issues in middle school, I guess it'd be in high school, to where sports was tough for me because of my back.
Okay.
Bigger kid. Essentially, I was a bigger kid. I grew too fast. Back muscles didn't keep up with it, and I always had back issues. And so I ended up getting into music. I played guitar, and the rebel in me, of course, I was playing in a rock band, and I was playing in. I was 15, 16, 17 years old playing bar circuits in Minnesota as a bass player in this rock band, and that was me as a kid. I wasn't a TV guy, I wasn't a sports guy.
Right.
I was all about music. So
Yeah, that's cool. That's
Yeah.
cool. So then you said you're doing that. You're doing these bar circuits. You're doing whatever. Did you say, hey, you know what? At some point, I'm not going to be living at home. At some point, I'm going to be getting out of school. I got to figure out what I'm going to do. Did you know you wanted to be a police officer the whole time, or was it
Oh
just?
my God, no! I was usually running from the police. I mean, not in a vehicle necessarily, but I was the 16-year-old kid that worked in a bar playing bass, and I had a beard. So, of course, they didn't ask me how old I was, and I,
Right.
of course, took advantage of that.
Right.
I grew up fast. Because because of the people I hung around, and so when I barely got out of school, my thought was I don't know what I want to do. I'd like to do something with music, which is how I ended up in broadcasting school.
Uh-huh.
Law enforcement's a second career for me.
I see.
So
So your
I
first
ended up-
love.
My first love was radio. I told my dad after graduating from high school, and dad, knowing that I didn't have a clue what I was going to do, and obviously I didn't have a whole lot of direction in high school if you look at my grades. When I told him, I said, Dad, I think I know what I want to do. I think I'm going to go to school. And he was shocked that I was going to go to school, because I hated school. And he said, well, what are you going to do? I said, well, I think I'm going to be in radio. And he said, son, I think that is the perfect choice for you. I said, why is that? I'm thinking because I'm well spoken. I've got a decent voice.
Sure. Yeah.
Dad's like, because I think you have the perfect face for radio, son. That's what he told me. And my dad, God bless him. My dad had the greatest sense of humor. He was known for being able to tell a different joke every day, and he was so much fun. And but that was the first thing he told me. He said, that's the perfect choice for you because you have the perfect face for radio. I'm like, well, thanks, Dad.
Until you start thinking about
I'll take that. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah, so I went to radio. So
And
I enrolled in broadcasting school in Phoenix, in Arizona.
Uh-huh.
The Ron Bailey School of Broadcast in downtown Phoenix, right across from the VA center down there. And I started my broadcasting career in 1988.
you go right into a radio or a radio studio, or did you? I mean, were you on the radio spinning records, that whole deal?
Yep. So I left, or when I finished school, it was a technical school in Arizona. When I completed school there, my first job I took was at a radio station called Z105 in McCook, Nebraska.
Mm-hmm.
And my first thought was, I was working at the Mayo Clinic at the time, actually. So Mayo Clinic had just opened up there in Scottsdale. Mayo Clinic is from my home area here in Minnesota, in southeast Minnesota, in Rochester. So I knew a lot of people that worked at the Mayo Clinic there. So I got a job there while I was in school.
That's cool.
And so then I started applying for radio jobs all across the country after I got out of school. And I ended up getting offered a production director and an afternoon drive show at the radio station Z105 KZMC in McCook, Nebraska.
Is that in the middle of nowhere?
I'm living in Phoenix, yes.
Right.
And I'm thinking, where the hell is McCook, Nebraska?
Like, all I think it was like the Wizard of Oz and the open farmland. Yeah.
I know. I thought, okay, well, I thought I'm going to take, it's my first job offer. I want to get my feet wet. I loved school. I loved the production aspect of it. And I thought, I guess I'm going to Nebraska.
Right.
So I packed up, I left Phoenix and went to McCook, Nebraska, where I knew nobody, and started working at the rock station there. And yeah, it was my first audio production. I was hired as a production director and then the afternoon drive guy. And I quickly found that my true love was in the production studio.
Oh yeah, not so much doing the.
I mean, I enjoyed the on-air stuff, but my interest is, I love sitting in the studio and creating a visual. The challenge of creating a visual or bringing you to a place or a time or an era.
Right.
That part's really cool to me. And so yeah, I loved, that was my first radio job. Loved it. Had so much fun there. And I met my wife while I was working there, or my future wife at the time. And yeah, it was great.
And that was the way it is. So you're spinning records in the afternoon and producing not in the afternoon. And
right.
you're doing this. How long did you do that?
So I worked in radio. I got out of school in 88, worked until 94, 95. So I worked in Nebraska, Kansas, back to Nebraska, and then moved back to Minnesota in 91, worked for the rock station in Rochester, Minnesota, which was fun for me because that was my home area, and it was a brand new, at the time, upcoming rock station there, and I had a great time there. Loved it. And again, I was hired as production director there, so that was my primary job.
Sure, and you got to be close to people you knew, family, all that stuff like that.
It was home for me. It was home for me. So
that had to make it nice.
Yeah.
So you're doing that, and how long did that last?
Well, so at the time, my wife and I, we had horses. My wife grew up with horses. I didn't. I grew up in town, and we had horses and a hobby farm. And with my work, I was looking for other things to do with our horses. I put a lot of hours into work. I've always been a workaholic, and my dad, who was with the sheriff's office in Dodge County, said, "You have horses. Why don't you get involved with the sheriff's posse?" Well, here the sheriff's posse is like a reserve group or a reserve department. With back at that time, back in the 90s, most of it was done on horseback.
Right.
So we do security at the fair, at rodeos. We do parades, help with searches or whatever, but it was all on horseback. And I thought, that sounded like fun to me. We had great horses, and I was just looking for something different to do away from my regular job. And so I got involved in the posse in 1996. And then one of the requirements being on the posse is that you had to do a ride along once a month. And I had never had any interest on the law enforcement side, really never even thought about it. Frankly, they were usually looking for me.
Right. You've done your ride-alongs, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So doing a ride-along, I get to sit in front. I'm like, hey, this is kind of cool. And I started doing. I did the ride-alongs. I ended up doing ride-alongs with one of the deputies who actually was a professional musician before he was a deputy, before he got into law enforcement. So we really hit it off, and I got to where I loved doing the ride-alongs.
Mm-hmm.
I love the ride-alongs. I love he worked nights, he worked the dog watch, so he worked overnight, and I just love the camaraderie. I love the aspect of, I love the adrenaline. You know, I love the aspect of being able to help people in my community. And I got hooked on it, and I went from being on the posse to getting sponsored and working part-time for one of the local police departments. And then another year I decided this is what I want to do.
Now, what do you mean by sponsored? Because
so back in the day here in Minnesota, you have to have a college degree to be a cop.
Okay.
So you have to have at least a 2-year degree in law enforcement,
mm-hmm.
and go through the state-sponsored skills program in order to get hired by an agency. You have to have that. Yeah, that has to be done first.
Mm-hmm.
But back in the 90s and then earlier, they had agencies could sponsor part-time officers. And these officers also had to test at the state level for their license, but they were only licensed to work, half of a full-time,
right. Okay.
1,040 hours.
Sure.
And you always had to be supervised by somebody else on shift. And typically the part-time programs were designed for smaller agencies that didn't have the funding to do multiple full-time deputies,
right.
or officers.
Right.
And that's how my dad ended up. My dad was a part-time officer, ended up never going full-time because he was a full-time teacher. He always said, had he not been a full-time teacher, he would have been a full-time cop, because he loved both jobs.
I see. Uh-huh.
And so I got it's kind of funny. I got sponsored by the police chief in Casson, who spent a great deal of time chasing me around as a kid when I was growing up. We were a pain in his ass. I don't know. Can I say that? We were a pain in his ass.
You can say whatever you want. Yeah.
And he sponsored me to work there part-time, and I loved the guy to death, because he gave me a chance. He gave me a chance when I was a little shit in high school.
Sure.
And,
yeah.
And he gave me a chance, sponsored me, gave me some experience, and I ended up going back to school, and I enrolled back in school again, got my college degree. My wife supported every move, and ended up getting hired by the county that my dad worked for, and that I grew up in, and I've been there ever since.
That's pretty cool. So as it's kind of fleshing out, I guess, so to speak, were you kind of was it surreal for you? Like, am I really doing this? Or no, I think this is the right steps I'm taking.
Yeah, it was weird for me, because it was just kind of a light bulb moment for me that this is what I want to do. This is what I look forward to doing. I made more money at my regular job, certainly, than law enforcement, so I took a big hit when I went back to school, but it wasn't about the money. I looked forward more to my part-time job than my full-time job. I, cliche as it sounds, I like the idea of having a little part in the community where I raised my kids in, and being able to know and be more educated on what to watch for, on who their friends are, who they hung out with, who they shouldn't have hung out with.
Right.
And it was probably a bigger adjustment for my wife, because she married a long-haired disc jockey at a rock station who played bass guitar in a band.
Right.
She didn't marry a cop.
And now she's having to adjust that, because they think that they're mutually exclusive, where you can't be one or the other. And right. I'll tell you, I've got a big drum set up in the other room, and awesome. that I played almost daily, because you were saying that you work graveyard, work the overnights and stuff like that. That's what I'm doing right now.
Yep.
And I find that I have the opportunity actually to play. I can get a good half hour or so play time, just practice right. time every right. day now, as opposed right. to when I work day shift, and I don't. But that's the idea. That's what I wanted to do when I was a kid. Obviously everybody wants to
be a rock star or whatever, but nobody,
Exactly.
you gotta know how to be actually a rock star. You got to know how to play an instrument. You got to have some kind of talent or put some discipline in it and work.
Yeah,
But
agreed.
I, and at that time, no, I didn't know how to do it. If I knew now how to play back then, if I knew how to play like I know how to play now,
Right.
sure. But that's only because I've had time to delve into it. But I wanted long hair and I wanted this and
Right. So for me, I ended up hanging up the bass guitar for a long time because I had 3 kids at home. I focused on my kids and my career and focused on didn't you sleep fast when you work nights and you have kids? So and they're all active in sports and they're all active in other functions in school and you have to spend a little extra time too making sure you stay married because that's always a challenge in this career.
But what's cool is my wife is very supportive and I'm assuming yours is as well.
Very, very much so.
And they just want to see they know that there's that other side where you got a lot of crap, you got a bunch of stuff you see at work and you have to deal with at work, and they want to make sure that that's not that, at least my wife mentions to me, she wants to make sure that that's not an issue that I have to worry about. I don't have to think about that stuff. So
right. Yeah, I hung the bass up for a long time and I ended up picking it up again. I suppose it's been 6 years ago now, 7 years ago. And I play in a couple different bands now. I have a little more time. My kids are all grown up and gone. And I play in a sheriff's band, which is fun. It's an all sheriff's band that we're a covers band and we play for charities around Minnesota.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
So it's pretty cool. And we're from all over Minnesota. So we can't practice because we're 5-6 hours away from each other. Right. So we're like the worst garage band you've ever heard. But we have fun. We get everybody involved and we have a good time. Then there's another band that I play with too. That's a much more serious, more of a Southern rock country style band. And I love it. So that's kind of my other hobby too. My other getaway from the office.
That's cool. You can't beat that sometimes. And that's especially the fact that you're doing it for charities and whatever. I'm sure just getting that name on there, that recognition from, hey, these guys are 5 hours apart from each other and they come together just for this.
Right. It's fun. And we're the only one in the country, I guess, that's a 5-piece sheriff's band. So we've gotten a little bit of attention on that and we just have fun. We're just now 4 years into this band, there'll only be 2 of us out of 5 after this term, 2 of us will be left active. The other 3 are retired. So, which I'm jealous of.
Right. It's just not time yet.
No, I know. Well, I know.
So, so you're a police officer, or at least a sheriff's deputy, and you're working there, and you start at the bottom, no matter who your dad is, and you got to climb that ladder, and you doing patrol, and you're doing investigations, and you're doing everything else that entails, right?
Yep. So I went from I started in patrol, had a background, and of course I have a background in marketing because of radio, and then a background I was familiar with computers and the internet, so I ended up working on the technology side of it and put the department's website together and got social media going and helped develop and organize the first MCT program for the computers in our squads. That was in 2005. And I went from the technology side and the patrol side to warrants, worked on the entry team, then went from there to investigations, worked investigations, and then I ended up running for sheriff. That wasn't supposed to be me. There's another story to that too. It wasn't supposed to be me. It was supposed to be my best friend at work.
Yeah.
In 2013, one of my best friends at work, Lauren Gunther, we had been planning he was gonna run for sheriff, and it was the fall of 2013. We were having a really tough time in our agency. We had a sheriff that had a very different management style, I guess you could say, than most. Liked to micromanage and was very discipline based as far as his as far as his leadership style, and it caused a lot of problems within the agency. And Loring worked. He spent all of his time trying to protect everybody from the sheriff. Loring was the captain at the time, so he was the third in command.
So he's doing a lot of filtering, huh?
Oh, so much filtering, and it got to the point where it really started to wear on him, and you could tell. And then it got to the point where he stopped talking. He just wouldn't talk about it, and I kept telling him, I said, you got to keep talking about this. If this stuff's bugging you, I mean, obviously it is. You can't bottle it up. You can't not talk about it.
Right.
And he stopped talking about it. His wife actually was worked with my wife. My wife has a dog grooming shop, and his wife was working with Rosie. My wife's Rosie Rose, by the way. Deb, his wife, Loring's wife, was working with my wife, and that morning, Deb came into work in tears, and she said that Loring just didn't want to go to work today. She said he was just sick to his stomach to go to work. She told my wife, she said, this job's going to kill him. And he died that afternoon of a massive heart attack.
Really?
He was 43.
Wow.
And we were all there. We all got called to his house. And she blames the at the time, the sheriff at the time for what happened to Loring. She had us insisted that we walk the sheriff off her property. He was not allowed on the property. And we were lost. This was the guy that he was our mentor. He trained us all. He was the one that was holding everything together. He was the one that was going to run for sheriff.
Right. And he's 43, and he's
43. And I was there standing on the deck of their house. He was still inside. They hadn't moved him yet. The medical helicopter, they had released the medical helicopter, and they called it. And I called, the first person I could think of was Sheriff Kevin Torgerson. He's the sheriff for Olmsted County, which is Rochester is the county seat. And I knew Kevin had been an original member of the Minnesota Law Enforcement Memorial Association, and had been on their honor guard forever. And he'd been with that organization since the beginning. And he's the first person I thought of. I called Kevin. I said, hey, Loring's gone, and I don't know what to do. None of us had ever been through this before.
Right.
And Kevin said, Scott, we got your back. We got this covered. We'll help you take care of everything. Don't worry about it. Just take care of your guys and take care of Deb. And so we did. And the Law Enforcement Memorial Association worked with us to do what we felt was just an unbelievable celebration of Loring's life, and a celebration of his service and his sacrifice. And just, it was an amazing, as funerals go, it was an amazing funeral. And super emotional and super touching. And
a great way to honor him, huh?
It was amazing. And that's when I thought that these people are phenomenal people. I mean, law enforcement, cops in general are just tremendous people, but the folks on the Law Enforcement Memorial Association who volunteer all their time are just incredible. And I thought, this is the kind of people I want to be associated with. I want to help other people like they helped us. So I got involved with the Law Enforcement Memorial, and I got on the board. I got elected to the board. And that's what got me started in being involved in with officers down and survivor families here in Minnesota. And after Loring died, a couple months after Loring died, the sheriff at the time fired the chief deputy, or the number 2 guy, which sent our agency in a tailspin because we already lost our number 3 guy.
Right.
And now number 2's been fired. And I drew the short straw, I guess. I ended up running. For sheriff. And
did he just not see it? Did he just not? Was his ego so big that he just didn't see?
Yeah. it's more of an old school approach. You know, if you look at a lot of the old school cops and the old school, where the Cleos, whether they're chiefs or sheriffs, you know, they micromanaged everything.
Yeah.
That's what they did.
Mhm.
And you can't do that now. I mean, it was okay to do that when you had 8 people in your agency, but we have 54 full and part-time people with our agency. You can't micromanage everything. Nobody can do that. And being the investigator, or one of the investigators, I ended up being assigned to the case, as well as being the liaison for Lima. And the Loring's, in his autopsy report, I discussed it with the coroner, and he had an acutely enlarged heart, which at 43 is unusual anyway, especially for somebody who was healthy and had never had any previous heart conditions. And they determined that it was due to acute daily stress.
Wow.
Which, when the stress wasn't at home, me and Deb were doing great. You know, stress was at work. And so it ended up being deemed a line of duty death in Minnesota. And
since he was number 3, he wasn't out on the road necessarily, right? He was in the office more often.
He was in the office.
So it's not from road stress and dealing with, you know, near death stuff. Yeah. This
was in the office.
And like you said, he's just trying to be that buffer for the guys. And
he was one of the white shirts, trying to protect everybody from the white shirts.
Right. Wow. And you know,
cops will understand that. Other people won't understand that.
Sure. Yeah. But you know, that's just so sad to think that someone's so blind. They don't even see their.
It was awful. It turned our agency upside down.
Right. I can imagine.
You know, and being a young agency anyway, and having most of us had been trained by him. He was our captain. He was in charge of training. He was a lot of the technologies and a lot of the improvements that our agency had seen in he was there 19 years, and just as the last few years that he'd been there, he made a huge impact on our agency that we still see today. So it was tough. That was really tough. But you know, we're moving forward today and trying to do it in a way that we know he would have approved of, and you know, you just got to move on.
Right. So you're with that, and you join that organization, and you're thinking, I'm doing something. And then that propels you into saying, hey, I'm going to run for sheriff because we need good leadership in there.
Actually, no, it was the other way around. So I ended up running for sheriff first.
Okay.
And then, so I ran in 2014, was elected January 6th of 2015. And it was that year that I ended up running for the board with Lima.
So did you run against that sheriff?
For my position now. He was the incumbent. So. And so
was it because you said we need something solid, we need solid leadership in here because of what happened to Lauren?
Yeah.
Is that?
Yeah. I mean, we needed a change. We have a ton of experience within our agency, and we have an agency full of great men and women who know the job, who do a great job, he fired our chief deputy who had not one disciplinary file in 25 years. We have an agency where we have no use of force complaints. We have nobody who's ever had a use of force complaint against them. You know, we have all the right people. We have all the right components to be a great agency. We just need leadership who will let them do their job and not micromanage them and not having them look over their shoulder all the time and know that we've got their back.
Right. Was it a case of, if not me, then who's going to do this sort of deal?
Yeah, that too. You know, nobody else wanted to run. The chief deputy who was fired, the sheriff's position was never something that he was interested in. He loved being a chief deputy, and he had been that for a couple of sheriffs prior. And but the sheriff's position isn't something that he was interested in.
Right. So you
Um,
so you get it, you win it, obviously.
yep.
And you said, okay, let's look at this from a standpoint where we can succeed in our mission
Yep.
and not just work towards things. Because looking at I looked at the your website, and
Yeah.
especially for your election, and you have an entire page dedicated to leadership. You
Yep.
have quotes from Teddy Roosevelt, one of my favorite presidents, and
Yeah.
you
Absolutely.
have quotes from a ton of different people, and it's on that you're talking about leadership. And
Yep.
what is your, so I guess I don't want to nutshell things. However, what's your view on that, as opposed to, some people have this view, like, this is how you're supposed to do it. It doesn't seem like that's what yours is. Yours is thinking
My
about other people. And
my responsibility as in this leadership role is to me is to develop other leaders,
sure,
to
yep,
provide the training and the tools and the support, and the experiences to those who work for them, to help build them into the next level of leadership for our agency.
yeah,
And to me, that's the most rewarding part of this job, is to have seen how some of these deputies, men and women, have grown so much over the years, just knowing they've got the support and not being afraid, and frankly, not being afraid to make mistakes. That's
sure,
the only
yeah,
way we're going to learn.
yeah, I agree.
And having leadership that has an open door policy. We have an open door policy in our office where I don't want all yes people. I
Mhm.
want some people who say no. I want some people who challenge my ideas, because they might not be the best ideas. They may have better
Right.
ideas.
Yeah,
I went into it maybe from a different perspective too, because I had so the chief deputy who was fired,
yeah.
the day I was elected, I reappointed him.
Oh, nice.
So, and he's still with us today. He's retiring on his own terms in January of this next year. So
Very cool. Very cool.
So he's been my chief deputy. But I have, in my admin team, they've all got more experience than me. They were all people that I looked up to as leaders.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I was put in a position where, okay, you got me in this position where all these people, especially my chief deputy, who has been there, I've been there 20 years. He's been there over 30. Now I'm there. Now they're looking at me for leadership.
Right.
And that was probably one of the most stressful things for me, and trying to kind of wrap my head around that.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, I've always been kind of a group thinker. I want to put everybody together. Let's get everybody together in a room. Let's talk about what direction we want to go. Let's talk about how we can improve things, and let's work together to figure it out.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Everybody comes to the table with different experiences, different expertise. While I had, with our admin circle, while I had certainly the least amount of experience from an admin standpoint, I had experience with projects. I like projects.
Right.
And I'm kind of a 10,000 foot guy. I like kind of looking at the big picture and seeing where do we go to build from here.
Right.
And who do we have in our agency who's best to put in the position to take ownership of that.
Mm-hmm.
We've got patrol supervisors who are our sergeants on all 4 shifts and in courts. And before I was elected, it got to the point where they had to approve everything that they did on the road with the sheriff.
Oh, wow.
If they were going to arrest somebody and put somebody in jail at 2:00 in the morning, they had to check with him first.
Wow.
There's no reason for me to do that. They're sergeants. They're there they've been promoted to that position because of their experience and their leadership abilities.
Yeah. Yeah.
And in order for them to excel in that position, they need to take ownership in it and feel like, this is mine.
Yeah.
This is my position. It's my responsibility. This is my crew. And I've got the support of admin to go out there, push hard, and not be afraid to not make stupid mistakes, but not be afraid to push the limit and maybe make mistakes, but to learn from them and to grow these guys and make them into better deputies.
Right.
So one of the challenges too, when I started then, coming out of investigations in a small agency like ours, at the time we had only had 2 investigators. And so you got 2 investigators who are called all the time, day and night, weekends, by patrol, which is fine. That's what we did.
Sure, but that's a toll, especially on those families of those people and wives.
Right. So then you combine that with the fact that they're coming off of an administration and a sheriff who wanted a phone call for everything.
Yeah.
Now they've got a new sheriff who they were already calling for stuff.
Right.
And now he's the sheriff, which we have been trained to call for everything. So I was getting calls constantly. And it's like, but I appreciate the call, and I appreciate your support, and I appreciate the fact that you trust me enough to call me. However, you have a supervisor, you have a sergeant,
right?
Go to your sergeant. You have, at the time we had, you have a captain of a patrol, and he's got a ton of experience. And if the sergeant's got a concern, talk to the captain, because he's there for a reason.
Right. That's why you have a chain of command.
Exactly. And we never had that before.
Yeah. I mean, why put people in those positions if you're going to not use them?
Exactly. And you put them in those positions, give them ownership in that position, and let them run with it.
Yeah.
And that's where the great ideas come from.
I agree. I mean, that's why you have people, and people, that's what we're doing. And that's why we're here on this planet, is for people. And so if we're not letting them be who they are, especially everybody's got a talent, and everybody's got a skill, or everybody's got a different education, a different lens that they're looking at it through.
Right.
If you let them do that, that's the greatness. That's the hallmark of America. We gave everybody the opportunity, the freedom to go do that. We become the most prosperous nation in the world. And now we're at that point where let people be them, and we'll grow together, and let us serve each other. And that's where really the real growth is going to come from. Right.
And I think, for me, I think part of it was I came out of a marketing and a business background. I wasn't always a cop, and there are a lot of cops, that's all they've ever done.
Right.
So all they know is whatever they were taught by the last administration, or the administration before them, if you're in a sheriff's office.
Right.
And I worked in a class, or a type A personality environment in radio, where everybody pushed to try and do the best they could, do the best work that they could, because we were ratings driven. Our advertising was ratings driven. Our support was ratings driven. Our job was ratings driven. If you didn't perform to the level that they were expecting you to, you didn't have a job.
Right.
So then I go from that to law enforcement, where the old school thinking was, I'm here, I'm tenured, I'm on the backside of my career. I'm just I'll take whatever calls come, but I may or may not be proactive, and it doesn't matter.
Right. And you can't do that. Yeah.
No.
And like I said, I'm not saying that the comment I made, and I get to think about it while you're talking, but it's not so much to say just go do whatever you want. There's still parameters that we're all within, and we have there's structure that we have to do it. But let that growth kind of go to that point to where you fill up that structure, and you're well within your lines, and you're taking care of what you need to take care of, but you're also doing it with a little bit of freedom. And that's that discipline that will give you that freedom, as opposed to a free form blob that's not that there's no form to it. There's no there's no structure. And so you got to have that, and there's structure, but that's where your discipline comes in, and that's where you've grown. But you have people who want to do it, and they want to be there, and they want to, like you said, they want to grow, and they want to do the best they can do. And if you stifle that, they're not going to want to do it. And they're going to just sit back and say, well, I can either do nothing, or I can go somewhere else. Maybe I'll look at something else. And and that's unfortunately, what happens sometimes. And so
I'm 7 years into this. This is next year will be my 8th year as sheriff. And I think one of the proudest things for me is the fact that we haven't had a grievance since I got elected.
Wow, that's pretty cool.
And most people who are in law enforcement are gonna listen to that and go, "What?" Because that's just doesn't
right. You don't. I mean, you mean you don't even have somebody call and said, "Hey, this officer was kind of rude to me," and you go back and you talk to him and like, well, he was actually saying this, and I think you misunderstood him or whatever the case. Not even a little minor grievance from.
Very rarely do we get anything like that, and we haven't had a formal grievance from any employee in 7 years.
Wow. From
the union. So we're a union state. I don't know if are you union state there?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So back with the previous administration, there were grievances filed every month.
Wow.
For stuff. Yeah, we haven't had one in 7 years.
That's really cool. And that's an absolute testament, to leadership and relationship that you're having with your men and women. And that makes a big difference.
The sad part about it is it's all the same people.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same people that the previous sheriff had.
Right.
It's just pointing them in a different direction.
Right. Giving them, like I said, giving them a different lens for them to look at.
Exactly. Yep. So it isn't anything fancy that I did. It's just, developing the problem with our career is the cumulative stress that our guys and gals go through with, when you look at traumatic incidents, an average person has 1, 2, maybe 2, maybe 3 major traumatic events in their life.
Right.
The average officer may have several a year. If you work in a big agency or a tough neighborhood in a bigger agency, you may have more often than that exposure to trauma. And that there's a lot of weight there.
Right.
And as Cleos, as sheriffs or chiefs, it's so important for us, and I learned this because of Loring. It's so important for us to make sure that we're not adding to that stress. We need to develop or create a working environment where it's open door. It's where we want to talk through the issues, where we want people's input, or we want our staff's input on ideas and how to change things and make things better, where our staff knows that we've got their back, where we know we're providing the best training, the best that we can provide, training, equipment, and support to let them do their job, to let them be safe, and to let them be the best deputy they can be. And
I hear Jocko Willink say he'll talk about it's developing that relationship, and that's what it sounds like you're doing. You have a relationship. You have the ability to speak into somebody else's life. They have the ability to speak into yours. If you don't have a relationship, you're not going to want to listen to them. They're not going to want to listen to you. And if there's not going to be a two-way street. There's not going to be a cohesiveness. If you have a relationship with somebody, boom, you're able to work with them.
And the problem is, if you don't build a relationship with your staff is not going to build a relationship with your community.
Right. Absolutely.
Because that's going to trickle down, and that's going to reflect on the kind of work that they're doing.
Right. I just had the chief of Pocatello, Idaho on here a couple podcasts ago, Roger Shy, and he was talking about that similar thing. And we got to talking about Sir Robert Peel's tenets,
Yep.
And one of the main things that I always think about in that is we don't have our job. We don't have who we are. We don't have law enforcement without the public's say so. Right. And we are there because they allow us to be there. Because honestly, you talk about patrol teams. We have patrol teams. We've got so many people on. We don't have, and we serve a community of 60,000 maybe, right?
Yep.
So 5 guys, 6 guys, or even like you said, 50 people. If the entire department is 50 people, 60 people, are they going to be able to enforce some kind of anything on 60,000 people?
Right.
No. And so that's why you have to have that relationship. Like, hey guys, do me a favor. Can we do this, please?
Right.
And if you're always walking around jackbooted thugging it, nobody's going to want to listen to you. Nobody's going to want to, and it's not going to be cohesive and not going to be peaceful. And it's going to be super tenuous. So,
agreed.
that's the growth, is where it comes from, is knowing that you have the authority because you're allowed to have the authority.
Yeah.
And but with that comes a responsibility of being better and being fair and being honest and being just and all that stuff that you learn
being
about.
held at a much higher standard than everybody else.
Correct.
And that's another stressor.
Yeah. Because the minute you lose that, minute you're not holding that line, you're not holding that standard, they're not going to want to listen to you. Why should I listen to you? You're a liar, you're a cheat, you're this or that.
Yep.
And you don't want to have
lose that respect in a heartbeat.
Yeah. So you're the chief now, you're doing all this different stuff, and you get into the whole officer down sort of thing, where you're now helping others and you're volunteering, you're on the board and stuff like that.
Yep.
Where does that go? What are you doing at this point with this stuff?
So I first started with LEMA, with the Law Enforcement Memorial Association. And then I got involved in the Law Enforcement Memorial Foundation of Southeast Minnesota. With that foundation, we're raising money to build the first law enforcement memorial for Southeast Minnesota. And we just broke ground here a couple months ago. We're excited about that in Rochester.
That's pretty cool.
And I have 4 officers from my county who were line of duty that will be on that wall, that will be remembered forever. And so that's kind of that's a bucket list for me to get those names up there. So, and Loring's one of them,
right?
To make sure that they're not forgotten. And with working with the Law Enforcement Memorial and then with the foundation, I got been able to learn a lot about survivor families and learn a lot about the process and the stresses and the fact that a lot of times these families feel their biggest fear is that their officer will be forgotten.
Right. Okay. Okay.
So with one of the widows that I worked with on a podcast, she told me that the way she explained it this way. She said, okay, my husband was killed in the line of duty. Then it's like a storm of activity where you have officers coming in and checking on you. You've got Lima who's helping you with the funeral. You're working with family to put together this celebration of life, as well as working with Lima and the agency to put together a celebration of service. And it's just a whirlwind of emotions that you go through up to the point of the funeral, and then afterwards it's there's family bringing over food and checking on you and calling you, and the agency's checking on you, and at some point the calls slow down,
right,
to the point where they stop in some cases,
right.
And part of that is the natural human reaction to a traumatic event like that, where you get to where after the funeral's done, you're hoping that survivor family is starting to work through things, and you start to feel like, I don't know if I should call or if I should say anything, because I don't want to bring up any bad emotions. I don't want to bring up any bad memories, or I don't want to set them back. I just don't know what to say. So a lot of people just don't say anything.
Right.
And she told me that every day she didn't hear something from somebody, or every day somebody didn't mention something about her husband, she felt like she was re-victimized.
Really?
The silence was re-victimizing.
Wow.
And I thought, wow, I'd never heard that before.
No, that's not something that you think about. Yeah.
No, I mean, and not everybody feels exactly that way, but my experience now has been a lot of them do. They want to talk about their fallen officer. There may be tears. They may get emotional, but they want to remember. They want people to remember. They want people to not forget the amazing person, their husband, their father, their dad, their son, their daughter was.
Right.
And that's their biggest fear. And which is kind of how the podcast got started in December of 2020.
And so you wanted to just I guess elevate these people and continue to talk about them as and keep their memory alive. I'm guessing. Is that right?
And of course in 2020 we had COVID.
Right.
And a lot of the work that I do, the voice work that I do in my studio at home was with businesses who got shut down during COVID.
Okay.
So for me, 2020 was a very slow. I didn't do a lot of work up in the studio. My studio is upstairs in our house.
Okay.
And I got to thinking about, I've got two careers I loved. I loved audio production and radio. I love law enforcement. And I got to think of and I loved working with survivor families and working with Lima and honoring these officers. And I thought there's got to be something we can do to better share the stories of these officers, to tell the rest of the story.
Right.
We read on the websites, the state memorial websites, we read the little, paragraph blurb, 2 or 3 sentences or whatever, explaining what happened, or on ODMP or on the national site, whatever. You hear what happened essentially.
Right.
But you don't learn anything. And I being on the board, I understand why you can't, it's tough to expand on that in that forum. But I thought, well, what if I put something together where what if I formatted something where I could tell the story? And I came up with an idea, or a format idea, that I thought, I love history. And I thought, if I incorporate history, some era history, some local agency and community history, along with the story of these officers, and let people get to know first put people in the mindset of the era, what time frame this is,
right,
and then introduce people to the community and let them get to know the community and the kind of agency it is, and that officer and their family. So it's like, okay, it's like, these people.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to walk you through exactly what happened when we lost that officer.
Right. It's a character development
Exactly.
and you're vested in this person at this point.
Yep. And now you're going to feel the loss.
Yeah.
And,
Gosh.
And you're going to, it reinforces the fact that the men and women that serve are amazing. They're amazing people. They would argue they're ordinary people. I would argue if they're ordinary people, they're ordinary people willing to take extraordinary risks. In most cases for people they don't even know. So I put together this format and idea, and I looked, and the first line of duty death in Minnesota is 1874. It's Matthew Hamilton. He was a police officer in the city of Winona, right along the Mississippi River.
Okay.
And of course, 1874, there's not a lot of information available.
Right. It's a little rougher time. It's
pretty rough for time. Yeah. I was able to find old newspaper stuff, records like that, to where I could put together this story. So I put together his story, and I had my 3 kids listen to it. So I have 3 adult sons. My oldest son is a veteran state trooper for the state of Colorado. My middle son is in entertainment in LA, and my youngest son's in Army intelligence, and he lives in Italy.
Okay.
And they all know about my music background and the fact that I've always been kind of a nonconformist, from the standpoint of just always doing my own thing and pretty independent. And I put this idea together. I had them listen to it, and they're like, the first question they asked is, "This is like a lot of the true crime podcasts we listen to, Dad. What podcast do you listen to?" I said, what do you mean?" They're like, "No, what podcasts influence you? What have you listened to? What different?" And they started naming off some podcasts. I'm like, I don't listen to podcasts. I'm a music guy. So
yeah, when I'm driving down the road,
account, right?
Yeah.
I have a Spotify account. I have an Amazon account, but I listen to music. I've never listened to podcasts. I said, podcasts are kind of new. I don't really listen to them. And my youngest son just laughed. He said, "Dad, I haven't listened to podcasts for like 15 years. I'm like, okay. So maybe they're not new. But I just never listened to one. And they're like, don't change a thing. Don't change anything on the format. And I haven't. It's exactly the same format that I started in the beginning.
That's cool.
And we're 22 stories in now. And so they were my first kind of my first sounding board to see, you know, is this something that's going to keep your attention or not? And they're my biggest fans.
That's cool. That's very cool. Yeah.
So
fun. Tell us about Matthew. Who is Matthew? What was his deal? What was the officer back in?
Matthew Hamilton was an officer with the city of Winona. He was walking his beat and walked through the train depot back in the late 1800s in Minnesota. This is some history stuff that I found kind of interesting. Back in the late 1800s, your primary transportation in Minnesota was the railroad. He worked for the rail yard there, or worked for the police department in Winona, and was walking the beat, walked through the depot, and ended up confronting an intoxicated patron who was essentially loitering there.
Right.
And that escalated into an altercation where he called for help. Another officer came to help. They got into an all-out fight, and he ended up dying from a heart attack from that fight.
Oh, wow.
And they got the guy in custody. Nobody else got hurt. And but he ended up dying from it. And it's an interesting story. To me, it's interesting because there's a lot of history in that one. It's not very long. That's like a 9-minute podcast. But it's our first recorded line of duty death in Minnesota. Wow. And for me, it was cool to recreate that. You know, I'm trying to make you think in your head that you're in Winona in 1874.
Right. And that's cool.
So,
yeah,
it's cool. So if you listen to the podcast and they're all that way, if you listen to them, I really encourage, if you got good earbuds, good headphones, good stereo system, because there is so much production in there.
Oh, really?
It's really cool. It's like radio. A lot of people have referred to it like radio theater.
Oh, really? Okay.
Like the old radio theater days.
Right. Yeah.
So I'm actually walking you through exactly what happened. You hear what we believe was heard. In these more current cases, I'll use the Sean Schneider one as an example. He was killed 10 years ago in 2011. And in that podcast, I walk you through what happened with the officer, the partner of Sean, who was there when Sean was shot and killed. And we incorporate the 911 calls. We incorporate the radio traffic.
Oh, that's cool.
And you're there. I mean, I recreate the scene. You know, so it's not. Some people think when they hear podcasts, they think it's an interview podcast.
Like this one here. But
like this one, yeah. These are completely different. These are, so when I use the officers who were there to help me tell the story, but I take excerpts out of my interviews with them and use it to help tell the story.
Sure.
And the same with the families.
Well, like you said, you like to, when you were talking about your time in radio, your thing was in production. You like to tell the story. You like to show what you were.
I love it.
Verbally show.
Right.
What's going on. So if you can, so if you were just doing a car commercial back on the radio, you're going to make somebody want to be at the car lot and you hear the whatever. So this in this case, now you're actually doing a commercial or more so regarding somebody's life who gave everything for the situation.
Right. So you think Bill Curtis with Case Files or with, it's that kind of a presentation, not not an interview type podcast. So
sure. So tell us a little bit about some of these guys, some of these people who we need to know, who we need to continue to put their name out there because they gave so much.
So there's so many of them. Like I said, I've done 22 of them now. We got a lot of stories in the works. Some of the ones that come to mind are Sean Schneider. He was a young cop in Lake City, Minnesota, who got sent to a disturbance between a high school kid and her boyfriend. And her boyfriend ended up being a pretty disturbed guy who was a veteran, a young veteran, who had come back from, I believe it was in Afghanistan, and it resulted in Sean getting killed. Yet he saved the life of this girl. And that was a tough one. That one was in December, and he was shot a couple times. It was a tough one for me because I knew a lot of the guys who were there.
Oh, okay.
I worked investigations back when that happened, and my partner and I listened to a lot of it on our task force radios.
Oh, wow.
I didn't know Sean. I never had the chance to meet him, but I knew a lot of the other guys that were there. And the story's pretty powerful because it talks about his partner. It talks about struggles with PTSD, and it talks about, really, it really shows how these officers, every day they're going into something where they know they have a risk of not coming home. Where they know they're risking everything,
right?
And like I said, in most cases, to help people they don't even know. And this guy was a hero, a true hero, and saved this gal's life. She's doing well. It's a pretty emotional one. It's an interesting one to listen to. This one's a good one to show as an example of, for me, from a production standpoint, it's the kind of story I like to tell, where I can get as much data as I can to really put you there, and to let you experience what everybody experienced.
Right. Yeah.
To hopefully make you even more appreciate the work and the stress and the sacrifice that these guys take on.
Yeah.
That's Sean Schneider. He ended up being on life support for several days. He died December 30th in 2011. That was a tough time for all of us.
Yeah.
You've got the Robert Lawson story from Itasca County. Robert Lawson was a very well-liked deputy up in the Iron Range up in northern Minnesota. And a very similar story to where he knew this family. He had dealt with the male party a number of times, the male party was very unstable. And in trying to save or protect the wife and the kids of this male party, he ended up getting executed by this male party, and it resulted in a long standoff that eventually resulted in the guy being arrested. And but in that case, for example, the guy that killed him, I'm not even going to mention his name.
We don't need to.
The guy that killed him had a 357, and he scratched in the names of all of his kids, his wife, and that deputy. Each of them had a bullet.
Really?
And he was going to take out every one of them.
Wow.
It's an intense story. I made a lot of friends on that. That sounds kind of weird, but I spent a lot of time with these families.
Right. And
with these officers in cases where the officers who worked that case and who were friends with the fallen are still here.
Right.
And I feel like I've made so many friends doing this and helping them remember and honor their loved one. And the Robert Lawson one is one where I just feel I feel like I'm friends with their family. I feel like I'm friends with his coworkers, and right. I learned a lot. I learned a lot of unintended benefits from the podcast that these families have experienced. And
right. Well, it reminds me of is how you may not see cousins or family members or whatever for years and years and years.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, say great grandma passes away or whatever. Well, everybody goes to the funeral. And so you pick right back up, especially there's some with some cousins, some family members that, maybe you grew up with, that you're able to pick right back up.
Yep.
And so all of a sudden, because somebody passes away, you are now the relationships are redeveloping. And now you're actually, because you lost somebody, it's bringing everybody closer. Right. And that's what this reminds me of, is that you have this opportunity because this tragic incident happened and somebody is now, there's a void in people's lives that's bringing people closer, but it's bringing other people in. Right. And you get the opportunity to have a great thing, a really good thing, because of a tragic incident. And I would almost assume that the officers who this revolves around, the tragedy that happens to them, they're being honored in the fact that everybody's having a new friendship, that there's new people that are being able to develop these things, that able to Absolutely. Good things are happening because of their life, because of who they were.
Right. So one of the common things I heard in doing these stories and working with these families, a couple common themes. One was the story being taboo. Families telling me that it's just not something you talked about. It's not something the younger generations really didn't know a lot of detail because the older folks just didn't talk about it. It was taboo. You didn't bring it up. And that's the way it used to be.
Right.
That's the way it used to be. It was just when the old school cops are like, suck it up. You deal with it. You move on. This is part of the job. And with these families, I had every family that I've worked with has learned something about their officer and about the incident that they never heard before.
Really?
Which is super interesting to me.
Yes. Yeah.
Even the Greg Lang story. Greg Lang was the police chief in Claremont, Minnesota, who was killed on 4th of July weekend in 1988. His wife, Sue, who is an amazing lady, since Greg's death has been tireless in her effort to help local, regional, state, and national organizations that support survivor families. And she is a past National Cops president. So knowing that and knowing the fact that he was killed in 1988, that she's told his story 100 times.
Yeah, absolutely.
And she learned things in this story that she never knew.
Really?
So when I put these stories together, I'll do a public data request to the agency. And with these agencies, I'm going to request all the narrative reports, all the police reports, any toxicology reports, the autopsy, interviews, pictures, any audio, radio audio or telephone audio, 911 calls, interviews of the suspects, any media data that was retained, whether it's newspaper or TV or whatever. And what I do is I put all those reports together and I figure out the timeline of that story, right? Essentially the timeline of that officer. and then I'll look and see what officers were there, or which officers were an integral part of that case, and which of those officers are still here. Some of these are older cases where a lot of the officers have passed, but which guys are still here, and then I'll interview them with their report in front of me. A lot of times when you tell stories over and over again, sometimes the details or the facts kind of get blurry. And so I'll have their reports in front of me, and if they remember something a little different from what their report said, I'll just say, hey, this is what it said in the report. I just want to make sure that I want to make sure that things are factual. And they're like, no, you're right. If that was in the report, that's what it was.
Right.
So essentially, these families are hearing a factual report of what happened. Now, if you think about it, back then, with the the trauma of losing that family member, they don't want to hear the details.
Right.
They're not going to look through the reports. They're not going to, all they're unfortunately certainly back in the 80s, they're just going to hear whatever was on the news or was in the newspaper and what was said in the trial, but they're not going to pay any attention to the details.
They don't want to dig into that.
Frankly,
they don't want to hear.
They don't want to know.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
So that being said, it's not surprising that now, having done these, it's not surprising that they all learned something that they didn't know before. It's just something I never even thought about.
Right.
So that being said, they all have said that being involved in the podcast has also helped them work through some of the grieving process that maybe they were stuck on.
So like a catharsis almost. They're
very much so.
Yeah.
Very much so. Probably one of my favorite feedbacks that I got was from a young man who I told the story of his grandfather. And he works for the same agency his grandfather served, and his grandfather died serving.
Mm-hmm.
And he told me, he said that Grandpa's story was taboo. He didn't talk about it because nobody talked about it. None of us really knew the whole story.
Oh, wow. Uh-huh.
And he said there were family members who became estranged from the fallen officer's immediate family because, like with everybody else, it became awkward.
Because nobody's wanting to talk about it.
Exactly. And he said, now that the story is out, and now that everybody knows what he did, and now that everybody hears that he was a hero and hears the details, everybody's talking about it.
Right.
And he said, we got family members that are reconnecting that we haven't heard from for years. He said, I have something that I can share with my kids to show them, hey, this was your great grandfather.
Right. They're heroes.
Cool.
They're
That's
heroes.
Powerful.
People need to know that. And
absolutely.
That's why I do my podcast, because there's people out there with stories upon stories, and a lot of people are humble enough, like, oh, I'm nothing. That's nothing. And you'd be surprised at what it is that the influence you've had on somebody, or that impact you've had on somebody that they otherwise wouldn't have. They wouldn't have changed this direction had you not said something or been in their life or something like that. And it's the guys that have passed away. We absolutely need to remember them and how they've done it. But there's the guys that are alive still today. You need to tell your story. You need to let people know. And you're not bragging about yourself. You're not boasting to where everybody thinks that, oh my gosh, this guy's head's so big, how'd he get in the room?
Right.
It's for other people. It's for people to learn from. And that's what we're, like I always say, that's what we're here on this planet for, is to serve other people. And
Agreed.
if we're giving of ourselves, then our story is part of ourselves to give. And and that includes our failures, and that includes our successes, and that includes our lessons learned and everything.
Agreed.
So
agreed. When you talk about officers being humble and not wanting to share or talk about their past or their service, the Douglas Clawson story, Chief Douglas Clawson, he died March 13th of 1999. His is a perfect example of that, where without giving up much of the story, he was injured in the line of duty during an incident, during an altercation.
Mm-hmm.
An injury that ended up being an undiagnosed spinal cord injury.
Oh, okay.
That made him handicapped over time. I grew up with that family. I grew up knowing him as a kid, and never knew never knew his injuries were related to being a cop. I didn't know. He was friends with my dad, and it was something that his kids never talked about. He never talked about. His wife didn't talk about it. She worked for the sheriff's office. She was the administrative assistant for the sheriff. She worked there over 30 years. And it wasn't until I got elected, and his daughter, who also works for the county in county administration, we were talking about Lauren Gunther. We were talking about the captain of ours that died.
Right.
And we were talking about my frustration with some of the line of duty death process that I was helping his wife with.
Mm-hmm.
And Chief Clawson's daughter made some reference to, well, you know, I totally get it. I said, something to the effect of, well, yeah, we went through that same thing. I was like, well, wait a minute. What do you mean you went through the same thing? Mm-hmm. She said, well, with Dad's line of duty death. Like, okay, Gene, we are both in our, at the time we were in our late 40s, right around 50.
Mm-hmm.
We're almost 50 years old. I've known you since I was a kid. I have no idea what you're talking about. That's when she told me about her dad, his injuries, about what happened with him, and him dying because of those injuries, and it being a line of duty death that was never, ever recognized in our county.
Wow.
And I worked with the state to get him on the state memorial, on the local Southeast Memorial, mm-hmm. and we got him on the wall in Washington, D.C., and we got Kathy, his wife, and Gene and the family out there to hear his name announced during the candlelight vigil that year for Police Week.
See, and that's huge. That's incredibly important, because huge. I mean, that validates their service. That validates the sacrifice that they gave.
Yep. And I asked his wife, why didn't you ever say anything? Why didn't you ever, you were the sheriff's administrative secretary. Mm-hmm. You worked for the sheriff.
Right.
Why didn't you pursue this? Why didn't you pursue him being recognized? And her answer was the sheriff was busy at the time. He had a lot of other things going on. We didn't want to burden him. And Doug's attitude was, if you complain about stuff or you talk about stuff like that, people are going to stop coming over. People are going to stop listening.
Yeah.
And that wasn't the way Doug was. And if you listen to that podcast, Doug's wife's in there, Kathy, she's in her upper 80s. Gene and a couple officers who worked with Doug back then. My dad was friends with him. It's a super, super story about really an amazing family who always put service before self.
Okay.
And when Doug got hurt, and it affected everything and with him, and they just adapted. And the family took care of Doug, and the family stepped up, and you got to listen to the podcast. It's just, it's really a touching story about this family and about the type of cops, the type of people cops are. I mean, he's just the perfect example of it.
Right.
And they're the perfect example of a blue family, of a cops family who we encourage everybody to always make sure to remember to thank your cops, remember to thank your deputies, your state troopers, thank your law enforcement folks in your community for what they do, because they've been just demoralized and just run through the mud here, especially Minnesota, over the last couple of years.
Oh, shoot! You don't have to tell me about it. I know. I live in Oregon. You know where Portland's at.
That's right. That's a good point. Well, so we tell people that it's more important now than ever for these guys and gals to hear your support.
Yeah.
We often forget, though, to support or to show that support for their families.
Right.
Because their families didn't sign up for this.
Yeah.
But their families go through the same sacrifices that those officers do every day that they walk out the door.
Mm-hmm.
And our survivor families, they take that one step further, where they're dealing with that sacrifice forever and that loss.
Yeah.
And we need to we need to remember to support the families that support these cops. Their wives, their parents, their kids. We need to let them know that we support them, because this is all this anti-law enforcement crap that's going on, the systemic, the narrative of systemic racism or systemic use of force issues nationwide, which, by the way, there's no factual data to support any of that.
Right.
we need to let them know that we support them.
Yeah.
We need to let them know that what their husband's doing, what their son's doing, what their wife's doing, or their daughter's doing. We need to let them know what they're doing is important. Because right now we're seeing, I'm on the local committee for the college for the law enforcement program, the advisory committee. And last year we had 50% of the students sign up for the law enforcement program. 50% of how many we had the year before sign up last year.
Right.
This year it's 50% of what we had last year.
Wow, that's pretty good.
It's the other way around.
What I mean, and that's sarcasm on my end. That's
it's
awesome.
Terrible.
That's great to know. No, it's not. Yeah, I agree, because
we got nobody. Nobody applying.
People don't want to. Yeah, we have the same issue here, and I can imagine it's everywhere else in the country.
Yeah, and because of that, it's more important forever for us to, for you and me and the survivor families, the blue families, as shitty as things have been with law enforcement, it's still a great career. I still wouldn't redo anything.
Yeah, I don't know what I would do if I wasn't a police officer.
No, I know. I would do it over again in a heartbeat, and it's been so rewarding for me. The most rewarding thing I've ever done is this job, and people need to know that. They still need to hear that.
I think of it like, the officer, he goes in, he does the training, he goes to the academy, he does all this stuff. He has recurring training throughout annually, all these different things. And then he actually goes and helps people or does whatever it is he's going to do. And he gets that reward of either the win in court or the helping somebody get out of a domestic situation that was just deadly for them and their kids, or whatever the case is. And they see the look on the faces, and they get the thank yous. They also get spit on, and they get, cussed at and all this different stuff. But they have this solid thing that I can hold on to this because I know I'm doing good because I've done good before.
Right.
There's that thing. And that's the officer himself. We're also, we've talked about it, we've touched on it, where the police officers don't necessarily like to talk about themselves. So they're not going to necessarily go home and tell these stories. Hey, I helped this person, and I helped this, and I pulled this baby out of a well, and all these different things. Those aren't always told. And so you get your kids and your wife, who either they go to work at whatever they work at, or they go to school, and they have all these other kids talking trash about cops, or saying that they see things on the news, or they see things on social media or whatever, and they're talking trash, and they don't have that glimmer of goodness that they've done.
Right.
And they just have these stories that, well, my dad's always been nice to me. He's always been, or my mom's she's never lashed out at me I've never heard her say anything racist, and I've never heard her do anything bad, or whatever the case is.
Right.
And yet social media and the news and everybody else is telling me that all of them are like that. But my parents never been like that. Am I missing something? Right. And so, but they don't have something to latch onto to fight this battle, to fight this fight. The police officer does, because he knows what he's doing and why he's doing it. His why is solid, and he's validated sometimes at work through that.
Right.
But these family members, they're just having to go off of faith. It's a blind faith that they're going off of, that no, they're doing the right thing. And I know that I don't have an issue, because police don't come to my house, other than my dad coming home or whatever, but I don't get in trouble. I don't do things where the police are called. And so I don't have an interaction with them.
Right.
But so am I missing something? And so there's got to be faith that the family has. And like you said, they have to know that they're supported as much as that we support their officer.
Absolutely.
It's a huge thing. And so when one does tragically die in the line of duty, they have to know that we still support them and their decision to love that person who served and gave all for somebody else.
Yep. And with the podcast, looking at it in November and December of 2020, some people gave me the feedback that, do you think this is really do you think this is the best time to do a law enforcement podcast?
Yes.
Yeah. And I said, this is the best time to do it.
Right.
Because these podcasts are yet another vehicle for us to show the public that the narrative's wrong.
It absolutely, absolutely.
These are amazing, amazing people, amazing families, and we got to support them. And so that was part of my motivation too. Is I'm just so tired of all the negative.
Yeah.
And this was just a way for me to put a little. I mean, granted, the stories are tragic, but the message is a positive message. That
right, and I agree. I started mine in 2020, and in December. Okay. Yep, that was my first episode. Was in December.
Yep.
And I've had some people, why do you want to do it? Why do you want to do it? And then, especially right now, and I haven't talked to a single person. And granted, most of the people I talk to are law enforcement, but I've had firefighters on here. I've had veterans on here. I've had nurses. I've had teachers. And but the idea is that there's this servanthood that we have to put up above it, because the world is so selfish right now. Right. And this whole idea that you shouldn't really do that because this might not be the best time because law enforcement and stuff like that. And I've actually had people say, well, why don't you talk to people who you can talk to Public Works or something. Those guys, they really, yes, you're right. They do good work. And without them, we wouldn't have, our parks or our, sewage systems and all that stuff like that. Awesome. Right. But there's another level. They're not demonized. They're not demoralized and pariahs of society because of some narrative that has no factual basis. Right.
Exactly. So that was a motivator for me too. I thought, I can do my little part to help the survivor families make sure that their stories never forgotten, and give them something that they can be proud of and share.
Yeah.
And further that message that, that the narrative and the garbage that you hear on the national media is false,
Right. I mean, I know a lot of cops. I know, and I've met several who have passed away since, and I've known them, but it wasn't necessarily line of duty stuff, but it's just one of those things that their memory, they're always known as, I remember this guy and he was this and these different things. It's a total different world than your regular person who had passed away because they made poor health choices or did whatever. It was, it was just that person was always, they were giving, and they had a lot of stuff to say. Then you hear the stories of the guys who were, well, yeah, he was that way. You also didn't know about him. You didn't know him this way. And that's probably the same stuff that, good, bad, or otherwise, the stuff that the family's hearing about when everybody gets around, a table or whatever, and they're just reminiscing about this person, and they're saying, oh, he did this. And the family's shocked. They're like, he did what? He was always so stoic, or he was so quiet. Oh no, not at this time. He knew how to,
the podcast, the way it's formatted, it gives you the opportunity to kind of walk through those officers' shoes,
right?
To be part of the family, to experience what they experienced,
right?
And I was warned ahead of time. I tend to be very anal about my production.
Okay.
I'm super picky about it. I'm an audiophile, and I'm very tough on myself with it. And so I was warned ahead of time by people who knew me in radio, saying, with podcasts, one of the biggest challenges with podcasts is that you can get sucked into that, the vacuum of being so hung up on the production side of it, focusing as much or if not more on the production side than the content side,
right?
That it can eat up a lot of time. And these podcasts, for me, because they're so important, to me they're so important to the family, I'm even more particular with these.
Right.
And my average production time with these from start to finish, from starting so I do the research, I do the interviews, I do the script writing, I do the production, the hosting, the finish audio production, then push it out.
Mm-hmm.
I average, for every finished minute of podcast,
Mm-hmm.
I average anywhere from an hour to 2 hours of production time.
Oh, wow.
So if it's a 40-minute podcast, I've got probably an hour and a half into it.
Okay.
I mean, sorry, I've got not an hour and a half. I've got almost 60 hours into it.
Right. Holy
to
cow.
produce it from start to finish.
Right.
I've gotten a little better now that I've gotten, I've kind of got a routine now that I've built, but very few of them are under 40 hours for me from start to finish.
Yeah.
Which
so
makes it tough when you have a full-time job.
Yes. Yeah.
Frankly.
Well, hopefully I can, I don't intend on putting that much time into my audio, my production, but we can still honor you enough, and it should still sound pretty good when we get it out there and stuff like that.
I just appreciate the support. The more for us, the more people who we can get exposure to, the more people who support the podcast and who support these survivor families and help honor these officers.
Mm-hmm.
The more support we can get, the more stories we can tell.
Yeah.
And the more survivor families we can help move on in that process and be able to share their story and make sure their fallen's not forgotten. And that's
agreed. Yeah.
That's the mission. So
yeah. So what's the next step for you? What do you obviously you're going to be sheriff for the next 20 years? Is that what your plan is?
Oh God, no. I'll do one more term.
Yeah.
It's a second career for me. So I'll do one more term. We've got great people in our office that could do just fine if I walked out the door now, and run it and do a great job. So, as long as I feel like I can be helpful and productive and supportive and help move forward and make changes and in a positive direction for the agency, I'll stay. I'll do one more term. I won't do more than one more term. Next year's election year.
Yeah.
And then it's time for somebody else to step up. I've got several people who we've seen grow over the years.
Yeah.
And have turned into great leaders themselves and excited to hand over the reins and see them take it and run with it. So
that's pretty cool. So what's the future of the podcast? Just go until it stops, or?
So it's when I originally came up with the idea, I was originally just going to do the 34 fallen officers in Southeast Minnesota in my district, in the 34 officers who are going to be on the wall that we're raising funds for in Rochester.
Right.
That expanded to greater Minnesota. And now these podcasts are also on the state's Law Enforcement Memorial Association page. So when you pull up that officer's page, you can read that little blurb about the officer, but you can also listen to the story.
Right.
Which is pretty cool. So I want to keep doing certainly Minnesota stories. I've got, I'm going to be doing some work with some other organizations, and doing some outside stories as well. I've got one coming up from Ohio. There's already a story on there from Nebraska. And then I've got two different kind of offshoots of the Officer Down podcast. We've got one survivor story that was produced, and that was the Dustin Reichert story. He was a he was a deputy who was shot during a noise complaint up in Anoka County, Minnesota.
Mm-hmm.
And he survived. He severe injuries. He survived, but it ended up ending his career.
Oh, okay.
And it's a cool story because I felt I wanted to incorporate some survivor stories because it's always nice to hear.
Yeah, you want to hear some positives,
Yeah. And his story is super cool. And the stuff that he's done since he got out of law enforcement. His partner at the time, you being in law enforcement, and the cops that are listening will appreciate this. So his partner at the time when he got shot, she had been off FTO for just a couple days.
Oh, okay.
And he was shot. She was sent back to work the next day.
Jeez.
She was never given any time off.
Really? She watched the whole thing, was right there the whole time, and got no consideration.
Nope. No.
Jeez.
A lot of lessons what not to do administratively in that story, which contributed to his ending his career. And I don't want to say anything more about the story. A cool result of that story is the podcast is being added to the curriculum at one of our state universities in their law enforcement program.
Really? That's cool.
Which is really cool.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go speak to those students at the end of the month.
Nice. We had a shooting in our area, and the deputy sheriff was in the shooting, and he got into it. And in the investigation, when there's a shooting, it's not like it is in movies where you get in the shooting and you go to the next call as soon as you're done. That's not how it works. It's not like Lethal Weapon, and that's
right.
That's a horrible way to show it, because it's a traumatic event. Nobody wants to kill somebody, honestly. So this deputy got into a shooting. They did the whole investigation. He had been trying to do what he can to, get in shape and do all these things. So he'd been walking to work. Well, he goes and does this whole thing happens, and he's planning on walking home at the end of the day. Well, at least that was his intention early in the morning. He didn't realize, this whole thing was going to go and drag out and be this long thing. Right. And it happened. Well, an officer from a neighboring agency knew him and saw him walking down the road. And so he stops talking to him. He says, "What are you doing?" And he noticed he was far from his house. He knew where he lived. "What are you doing?" He goes, "I'm just going home." He goes, "Weren't you in a shooting today?" "Yeah, I was." He goes, "Well, what are you doing?" "I was walking home." Oh my gosh. So he gets him, he goes, "Get in the car." So he takes him to his house, and he goes, "What?" His wife, I don't know, she wasn't there, or they had just split up or something along those lines. And so it turned out that he'd only had a peanut butter sandwich that day to eat. He didn't have necessarily any food that he was planning on cooking for dinner. He was in the most dire straits, and they expected him to be at work the next morning too.
That's crazy.
And it's one of those things that you're not taking care of this guy. And this was years and years and years ago. This isn't a current thing, but that's a traumatic event in his sense, right? He lived through it. Great. However, you got to take care of those people. And I've talked to various officers, and either on the podcast or not on the show. And personally, I'm the peer support supervisor or coordinator for my department. And so it's one of those things. We've had numbers of a couple of officer involved shootings. We've had traumatic events. And you got to take care of these guys, because it's something you'll take home. Right. I mean, I remember the first Sid's death that I saw. That was horrible, and I had to go home and hold my kids. And you have to do that. There's all that sort of stuff. I had a guest on here named Chris Hoyer, and he tells a story. He had a book called When That Day Comes that we went over on the show, and he tells a story about one of his best friends getting killed in an officer involved shooting. And he was there. He watched it happen, and he was the one who took out the shooter.
Right. And
he tells this story, and then the wave of stuff that happened afterwards, from thinking he was okay to knowing he's not okay, to the memorials and all this different stuff. And then they went to Washington, D.C. in order. And his partner or his friend was honored by the president. His son got called out by name by the president, all this different stuff. And they're at the memorial, and he had this giant breakdown. He goes over the entire thing on the podcast, and it was so good talking to him about that. And he said, I'm an open book on this one. And he just lays it all out there. And he talks about how his best friend, and how he dedicated his book to his best friend, and all this different stuff. And it is such a powerful story. But he didn't, and then the way it worked out for him wasn't so good. He's in a great place now, but there's a way that, if you don't take care of people and you don't look at them as people that need something.
Right.
Yeah. Cops are A-type personalities, but they are people. You have hurts, and you have feelings, and think about other stuff and you have dreams that you want to go accomplish. And there, like I said before, there's evil people and there's recklessness that people take away from other people because some person's decision to make some life choice messes up somebody else's desire to go help somebody else.
Yep.
And I don't think people think about that. We're so busy looking at, things on TV or social media or video games. We don't consider that people are people.
Right.
And nobody walks out their door wanting to kill somebody. Nobody walks out their door wanting to ruin somebody's life or anything like that. At least no cop I know walks out their door every day and says, hey, I'm going to go. I got to go ruin some days.
Right.
That's not what we're doing. And so
right.
This narrative, like you're talking about, that we want to go out and do that. No, we're people and we're just doing a job. We're trying to do what the citizens have asked us to do. Can you be there while I go to sleep and just make sure that I'm safe and my family's safe and it's livable here?
Yeah.
And that's what cops are trying to do.
The last podcast we did is also a little bit different. It was an officer down story about Sergeant Corey Slifko. He was a sergeant for South St. Paul PD.
Mm-hmm.
And one of those type A personalities that he'd always wanted to be a cop. He was super enthusiastic and gung-ho and quickly worked his way up the ranks. And being a type A personality, was always a hard charger. Had a handful of pretty serious injuries on the job. They worked in a pretty busy community from a law enforcement standpoint. And Corey ended up killing himself in 2019.
Man.
And there's a number of reasons for it, all work related, from stress to PTSD to dealing with chronic pain, from injuries from work, from being that cop that just can't turn it off, that's always a cop.
Right.
And the podcast talks a ton about the stress. It talks a ton about the reality of being a cop and the stuff that you go through and the stuff your family goes through. His wife is super open about what their struggles were. And it's a tough podcast. It's a tough podcast to listen to, but it's such an important one to listen to for Katie. Normally I would never do a podcast that's that recent.
Right. Okay.
It was November of 2019. But she wants to use his story to help try and prevent any other families from going through what they're going through.
Oh yeah. That's so tragic. That is
she's
so
an amazing lady, and her kids are amazing. His kids were 14 and 12 at the time. And that story is heartbreaking. But it's real, it's raw. It shows what we go through and the struggles and the challenges that officers and officers' families, the challenges that they face, that they have to constantly overcome, that challenges that without asking for help, they may not be able to overcome.
Yeah.
And Corey ended up being that way. And he was one of those guys that he was the last person anybody ever thought would take his own life. He was the first person to tell you, you call me.
Oh, really?
You're hurting. You call me if something's bugging you. He was there for everybody else. And
his cup was full.
His cup was so full. And when we talk about trauma and we talk about the cumulative stress that these officers go through, you look at a situation like that where an officer takes their own life. You look at a pond. We're looking at a pond. Officer takes his own life. Your fellow officer, your best friend, whether it's Loring, my best friend Loring dying, or it's Corey taking his own life. That's a huge stone.
Yeah.
So you take that stone, you toss it in the water.
Right.
Huge ripple effect. Affects that family, the agency, the community, the state. It affects everybody, and that ripple takes a long time to calm down.
Right.
And for those officers in his agency, the next time they go to a domestic, where the spouse is where a serious domestic.
Right.
That's another big stone. Not as big as Corey.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big stone. That stone gets tossed in the water. Ripple effect eventually calms down. Child abuse case, car crash, a SIDS baby like the one you referred to.
Yeah.
Every one of those is a traumatic event and a stone that gets tossed into your pond. And that ripple effect, it calms down, and at the top it looks fine. At the top the water's calm, but down below you still got all those stones.
Yeah.
You still got all those stressors. And if you don't address it, if you don't deal with it, if you are struggling and you're not asking for help, it's going to catch up to you. This career can be the most rewarding career ever, or it can completely eat you up.
Right. Yep. I agree. 100%.
It's a mindset.
Yep. And it's what you do. How do you deal with it? How do you take it out?
Yep.
How do you, what are you doing outside of work? Because you have to be outside of work, and you need to go outside of work. Like you were talking about Loring, all his stress was at work.
Yep.
But if he wasn't, had anybody taken that opportunity and said, hey, let's get this off your plate, let's take some of this away. But there's people that officers in general that need to, they go through all these different stressors, and you lay them out, but there's administrative stressors, there's all these other things. If you're not dealing with them, you don't have some kind of outlet, whether it's working out or whether it's going and doing
right.
For me, it's working out. I do martial arts. I play the drums. You have outlets. You talk to people. You go to church. You do whatever your thing is. Get that out there. So you go to camping, you go hunting, whatever your thing might be. Get it out there. So you're not sucking that up, and it's just not sitting inside your center,
right?
Not ever leaving. And you need to talk about it. You have to talk about it. And if you don't think your spouse can handle that conversation, you need to find somebody else to be able to get that off your chest.
Right. And we tell new hires, we encourage them, you got to have a life outside of law enforcement.
Right.
If your identity 24/7 as a cop, it's going to eat you up and you'll never make it.
Right.
This career will take you down. And you gotta, one of the things that I share with people is that I ended up pushing away a lot of my really close friends when I went into law enforcement, because it was more comfortable for me to hang out with cops that knew what I was doing, that I felt comfortable with, that I could share with, work stuff with, or stuff I was frustrated with or whatever. And that became uncomfortable with my non-law enforcement friends, and I kind of pushed them away. I didn't realize I was doing it at the time. And fortunately now I've reconnected with a lot of those folks that I had pushed away for years. But I learned from my chief deputy he's always kept that close circle of friends that aren't law enforcement. And he's got an identity outside of that office, and he's probably mentally one of the most stable and healthy guys that I know that's been a cop for 30 plus years.
Yeah.
But that's because
cool.
he's been able to find that balance that works for him. And myself reconnecting with a lot of friends that I'm still very close to, and they're the kind of friends that we talked about before, that you maybe haven't talked to for years, and you get into a room and it's just like you hung out yesterday.
Yes. Yep.
Those are the friends you got to hold on to, because those are the friends that are going to support you through the good and the bad.
Right. That's like,
but it's so easy to put right. And it's so easy to push them away. And I'm in such a better head place now because I've reconnected with those folks.
Right.
Not that I still don't spend a lot of time with cops, because I do, because they're my family. But I need that outlet.
Yeah. Dr. Paul Gilmartin mentions in his book, Emotional Survival for Law Enforcement, he says, you got to have friends that are not cops.
Yeah, you have to.
You have to, because otherwise you're just
never told that in the beginning.
Yeah.
Right.
You're going to just talk shop. You get together, you're just going to be talking about this domestic and that baby and this thing and that thing and the crash and the stuff. And if you're not doing that, you're going to talk about the weather. You're going to talk about your football team. You're going to talk about the sports your kids are playing. You're going to talk about stupid stuff. And that's actually what life is about. You're going to talk about your vacation to, whatever beach and stuff like that. So
when I started, I was told I could get shot, I could get hurt. I could lose my life in this career. Nobody told me that this career was going to put my mental health at risk.
Right.
Nobody told me that. They didn't tell us that. When you weren't supposed to talk about cases. You weren't supposed to bring anything home. You don't. Well, you move on to the next case. Suck it up, Buttercup. That kind of attitude.
Right. Yeah.
It's part of the job. It's like, you take any cop today, dealing with and seeing everything we see that we can't unsee.
Mm-hmm.
If they tell you that there isn't anything that bothers them in this job, they're lying.
Right.
Or something is wrong with them.
Right.
Frankly, because I don't think there's any one of us that don't have some level of PTSD from you can't unsee what we've seen.
Absolutely. I was talking with Scott Medlin. He was another guy I had on the show, and he mentions that same thing. You can't unsee things. There's trauma that's happening inside of our own minds.
Yep.
That it's just going to stay there.
Yep.
And
you relive that trauma with that family member.
Yeah.
You're part of that trauma.
Right.
And you gotta make sure you're processing. You gotta make sure if you're not okay, you can't help other people.
Right. And there's that other side. Is I heard he was chief of police in Chicago area. I don't remember the city, but his name's Kent Williams. And he talks about how he was like 4 years into being a cop, and he goes his best friend, who was cop of the year, all this different stuff, officer of the year. You just say cop, but nevertheless,
I do too. Yep.
Nevertheless, he was officer of the year, all this different stuff. He committed suicide. He killed himself, and Chief Williams he said he went to his admin and he goes, or no, it was during a briefing, and they had come in and they said, hey, just so you guys know, blah, 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 blah. He already knew about it because he was his best friend, but he goes, he was just so mad. He just was sitting there and he was just fuming and shaking. And he just slams his hands on the table and says, what the hell is going on? And they're like, and so he was almost to that level of insubordination, the way he was talking to him. Right. But he said, he goes, let's look at this. If our patrol car, we're driving down the road and the check engine light comes on, what do you guys expect us to do? Get it over to the shops and have them look at it and fix it, whatever it is. If I don't write it in the book, I don't do whatever. And then somebody else picks it up. How come you didn't do this? And then I'm in trouble. Right. But when an officer, our biggest asset, our number one asset in this entire thing that we're doing here, has a check engine light on, nobody cares. Right. It's nope. Get over there and keep working. Yep. You gotta burn that engine out.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
If we don't have people that are coming alongside and keeping an eye out for those check engine lights, taking care of each other, what are we doing? So that's why I think it's very important that we have people who are like, I look at it like a tugboat. You're coming alongside somebody and helping them. It's not because you're weak. It's not because you're incapable.
No,
it's because you're
weak if you don't ask for help.
Agreed.
Frankly,
agreed.
And the other thing we have to remember too is it's not just our cops. It's our dispatchers.
Yeah,
our records folks. Anybody who's involved in that case or that incident. You got to make sure they're okay. And
who the other people that I think about all the time, they take a lot of it and you never see anything for them. And that's like the chaplains or anything like that. They're always there. Hey, can we call a chaplain for you? Yeah. And we call them, they're at the debriefs, they're at all these things, but they never.
Who takes care of them?
Right.
Who do they go to?
Exactly. Because they're not going to anybody in the department. They're probably going, if they talk to another pastor or whatever, denomination or whatever the religion they are, or whatever the case is, who's taking care of them. So we got to think about everybody taking care of everybody and who's taking care of whom, and making sure we're coming alongside those people that we care about in our lives.
And that's the environment that we've worked to create here in our county. And it's work. We have a great peer support team. We have 9 chaplains, which for a small county in Southeast Minnesota, we're the only county in Southeast Minnesota that has a chaplain program like that.
That's awesome. We have 4 right now,
which is awesome. We're a small bedroom community of Rochester with 21,000 people.
Okay.
We have 9 chaplains, and we have 8 or 9 peer support team members. and I'm constantly hearing from our firemen, our medical responder, our EMS, all of our first responders at some point or another have contact with these chaplains and have talked to our chaplains, and they just appreciate the fact that we're working to try and provide that support to make sure that everybody's okay.
Yeah.
That we are an agency where it's okay not to be okay.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And that's the verbiage. And it doesn't mean that you're flawed and you're a horrible person and you're a loser and all this different stuff, failure, none of that. It just means that you're going to get, if you get enough scars, which is what all these incidents do, they scar our brain, our thought process, all this sort of stuff. You get enough scars, you need a Band-Aid at some point. You need something to come in and pack that wound. And that's all it is. If you get shot, what are you going to do? You're going to call for a medic. If you go through a traumatic event that mentally traumatizes you, you need a medic. You need somebody designed and trained to help you get through that. It's going to take a little work on your end, and you have to talk.
Right.
But
so this last podcast with the Corey Slivko story, it's just that takes that narrative one step further and shows you what can happen when you don't take care of your staff. When you're not supporting them, when you're not focusing on their mental health, when you're not when you don't necessarily have an agency where it's okay not to be okay,
right?
And you don't have a support system where there are some checks and balances to make sure that your guys are okay. And when I say guys, I mean guys and gals.
Right. No, I know exactly.
You got to support your staff, and so that was a powerful podcast. That was and so many different emotions in that one, with it being a suicide. And I stress out when I do these. So when I first started doing them, my wife would tell me, sometimes you got to take a break. Like, well, what do you mean? She said, well, I can tell when you're in the middle of that podcast, when you're in the middle of when it happens, because you become short, you become snappy, you become irritable, your demeanor changes.
Right.
And I at the time I didn't realize it. And there are many times where I've worked on these podcasts and it's brought me to tears and I have to walk out.
Sure.
I got to take a break.
Yeah.
In the beginning I didn't. I just muscled through it, and now I know well enough now to take a break, and because they're real, they're raw, they're emotional, but they're such a great example of what the great men and women do that serve our communities. So hopefully people get that from the podcast. So
yeah, and that takes us back to that portion we were talking about before with relationships. If she didn't have that relationship with you, and this is just an example, she wouldn't be able to say that to you. She wouldn't be able to say, hey, you need to take a break, or you need to, this is what you're becoming. Some people would be like, well, I don't have the place to tell him that. That's not my place. That's her place. Absolutely. Because she has the relationship with you.
We've always been very open, and she's always been my biggest supporter and my biggest, my best friend from the standpoint of being able to talk to her about stuff and share struggles that I have with work. And
I have that same relationship with my wife. She's always been there from day one to support me in what I'm doing. And then she said, oh, you want to start a podcast? Okay, what do we need for that? Oh, well, I was just thinking that as a kind of just, speaking that. And she's like, oh no, let's do it, because you have both, you have this stuff. And I was like,
yep.
Okay. So not only that, but everything. She knows that when I was on SWAT, she knew that at any minute we got phone calls at 2 a.m. Hey, we got a call out.
Yeah.
And I said, and she's like, who was that? It's team leader. We got a call out. She goes, okay. So she's hopping out of bed. She's filling up a water bottle. She's making sure, do you got anything to eat? You want something? I was like, I just woke up. She goes, well, what do we need? And she's making sure, awesome. Here's some socks. Here's your boots. Here's your stuff. And she knows where my stuff's at. And so she's rocking it. And so she would get up with me and then she would go back to bed when I leave. And then but she did her one thing was, I want you to text me when everybody's safe. When you can text me, let me know that you're safe. She goes, you don't have to tell me the details. I don't want to know that. I just want to know you and your guys, your team are safe.
Yeah.
And so what I was always when we get done, we would actually be driving back. Hey, we're all good. Either bad guys in custody, or we are, he wasn't there, whatever the case was, and we're all safe. Nobody's hurt. She'd be like, okay, great. And she said as soon as she would get that text, she'd be able to go back to sleep soundly. So
right.
But she's
invested too. I mean, she signed. She didn't sign up for this.
No.
But she's in the middle of it.
Yeah.
She's part of that. She's part of the law enforcement family, and my
and
wife's in the same way. We just had our 30th anniversary, and just love her to death. She's been a huge supporter of mine.
And that's what every one of those families that you're talking about is. They're all in there. They've all done that. They've all been there, and they've all supported their officer.
Right.
To the end.
I think that's why I love the survivor families, because they've been through everything.
Right.
And they are, I don't know, they're so humble. They're so, all they want is for their officer to be remembered.
Yeah. And because they were important. There's so many people that have been on this planet that are forgotten. I mean, and we have this opportunity now via social media, via the internet, podcasts, books that we're able to write, all these different things that some people just could not do hundreds of years ago.
Right.
And so,
agreed. Yep.
And we really have this opportunity to motivate, inspire people with our lives. And
if we don't start doing that now, we're going to be in trouble. It's already going to be a tough couple of years. We already know that.
Yep.
With the direction and the narrative and we've become a political football, so to speak, with our leadership, and we gotta push forward, and we gotta push against that. We're the silent majority that's got to push against that false narrative.
That's right.
So
yeah, and we do that with telling our stories and being positive influences and inspiring people in a positive way.
Absolutely.
This negative stuff and this hurt, and this hatred towards one another or whatever, it just needs to stop. Yeah. So I mean, we've been going for a little while, and I absolutely appreciate you coming on, and this is fantastic. And I think, I'm going to have to put the Officer Down Memorial podcast on a rotation, make sure I've got, each one of those, and we get that. And I would, and those of you guys listening to it, listening to this, I know you like me. Scott's way cooler. He's
whatever. I'm the white shirt in the office.
Yeah. But, listen to both of ours. You can do that. So, especially if you have a commute, that's the best time to do it. So anyways, I just want to let people know that if you want to get a hold, if for some reason you were able to get this one, you can also share with your friends, family, all that stuff like that, how to get a hold of the What's a Hero podcast. We're on Instagram, we're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, I'm on LinkedIn, and I put a link to every podcast on those pages. And so if you go to our webpage, which is the What's a Hero podcast.buzzsprout.com, you can see every episode we have on there, or it has links that'll take you to every podcast platform in which you can download whatever episode you want to, or all of them. And from there, knowing that you're downloading, that gives me solid numbers. When you listen to it on the website, that's cool. That doesn't necessarily give me a feedback on
right
what it is anybody's listening to. However, if you want to give a rating or whatever on Apple Podcasts or anything like that, or you want to say anything on our social media, say it, man. Let us know, and you tell us your story too, because it's absolutely important that your story is out there. And if you know people who are heroes that their story needs to be told, absolutely get a hold of me. I'd be happy to talk with you, and we get you on the podcast. That would be cool. Or Scott would be actually interested in knowing, a story like that for you. So I think it would be one of those cool things. So get a hold of us. on the What's a Hero podcast, and we would be happy to work that angle, do what we need to do to just tell the story of heroes and stuff. So Scott, you got any final words of wisdom or final thoughts you'd like to share with everybody before?
I just hope that I just encourage people to check out the podcast, check out these stories. We're at officerdownmemorialpodcast.com is our website.
Okay.
We're on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, on YouTube, on Rumble. You can pretty much find us anywhere that you normally listen to podcasts. We're going to be on there, and it's like you said, the like and follow us on social media. Definitely download the podcast, because that gives us a different that helps us with numbers, helps us reach more people, helps us move up in the listings, and share the podcast, share them with your friends, share them with your family, certainly share them with people who question law enforcement, that
yes, absolutely,
who have fallen into this narrative of the systemic racism narrative or the systemic use of force narrative. Have them listen to some of these podcasts and have them help educate them on the kind of people that put on the badge and go out and serve these communities. And you'll find that those narratives couldn't be further from the truth. So
right, absolutely. I couldn't have said it better. So I do want to thank all of our vets out there who are serving, and it's a rough time right now with all the stuff going on, and we talked about the divisiveness and all the stuff like that. But our vets, without you, we wouldn't have the country we have. Without our nurses and our teachers taking care of us, we wouldn't have the country that we have. We wouldn't have the quality of life that we have, and our firefighters, our EMTs, our doctors, frontline workers like that give up so much every day for other people. It makes such a difference, because we wouldn't, like, once again, have that quality of life that we do have without you. And before I go any further, I just want to let people know that, there are, as far as this year alone, there has been 340 line of duty deaths for police officers. Last year, there's 374. That was all year last year. This year, it's 340, and it's only October. In the last 5 years, 1,400. In the last 10 years, 2,200. And over all time, it's been 25,000 line of duty deaths for police officers. That's way too much. For information, if you want to know more about, that sort of thing, line of duty deaths, and the officers in which gave everything for other people, you can go to the Officer Down Memorial page. Just type that into Google or Bing or whoever your search engine is, and they'll take you right there. It tells you their stories. It tells you everything you want to know about them. And it's the idea, the founder of Officer Down Memorial page, he says, when a police officer is killed, it's not an agency that loses an officer, it's an entire nation. These people, these officers, they do everything for the people of this country. And I can't thank you guys enough. Even though I'm currently working, I know Scott's currently working in law enforcement, it's not us. There are officers out there that give so much, and I can't tell you how thankful I am. My family is thankful for you, and without you guys, we honestly wouldn't have the country we have and the ability to have a quality of life that we do. So we can't lose that. We can't take that for granted, and we have to be inspired by those who came before and did it and gave everything for it. So
amen.
So with that, I want to thank Scott Rose for coming on, and for Scott Rose, I've been Ken Frownfelter, and this has been the What's a Hero podcast. We're clear.